Yeah, or you got it.
Then we
Okay,
can
we're
discuss later.
recording. Okay, good morning to all those on recording and to all of those here. We're about to begin.
I have,
We started
I,
last week talking about Judaism and medicine, and we saw that there were some early um, sources that talked about, well, you should just pray to God because that's the way we see in the Bible when healing occurs. We've certainly seen that actually in the last few weeks in our Torah portions when Abraham pretends that his Sarah is his sister, and they go to the Gerar, and Avimelech, the king, takes Sarah and gets sick. Abraham prays to God and is healed. There are other examples as well in the Bible where we see people pray to God. And some of the early rabbis say, you should just, when you get sick, just pray to God. But then we see later on, there are rabbis and it kind of moves from rabbinic sources that say, okay, it's okay to go to doctors, although there are some negative statements here and there about doctors in the Talmudic materials, until later on, where I get to Maimonides and we talk about, oh, not only is it okay to go to doctors, it's a mitzvah to go to doctors to save lives. And the teshuva that we looked at from Rabbi David Golinkin made that point that certainly nowadays we as Judaism does not believe that you should avoid doctors, and that I think actually maybe I should write a email to Rabbi Golinkin just out of I might do that. Part of the I think the issue may have been uh, that up until 100 years or so, the number of ways in which doctors could heal was somewhat limited, and that you don't get until you get to the more modern period. Yeah, there were certain things doctors could do, but until we get modern drugs and modern diagnostic materials, yes, one could say that there could be certain amount of feeling that doctors could not heal. Did any of you see that TV series Death by Lightning about the assassination of President Chester Arthur? No, I recommend it. uh, Do you remember President Chester Arthur? He was only
Yes.
president very briefly. He was shot by a mentally unbalanced man, and at the time, he lingered for several months afterwards. And the belief is that it wasn't the bullet that killed him, but sepsis infections that were caused by the lack of sanitary actions by the doctors. And actually, in the series, it's a bit fictionalized. They make that point. They show how the doctors were incapable of really understanding that they needed to sterilize their equipment while they were searching for the bullet in his body. And actually, had they just left the bullet in his body, he would have been fine. But he died. Okay, so we noticed that yes, Judaism doesn't talk about medicine. Now, the next area that we want to talk about is about praying for healing, which is a something that, of course, we last when we ended last time, I made the point, and I think we all agreed that praying for healing has become a much more significant part of Jewish worship. Yes, we can thank Debbie Friedman because she composed that beautiful melody that we sing when we talk about praying for healing or for shlema. But also in general, we've seen a greater emphasis. And as I suggested that went back, I don't know how many years, we made certainly before Debbie Friedman, not only didn't we sing, but now you see, while there's a tradition of praying for healing only at services publicly where the Torah is read, even in some traditional places, there are the public prayers for healing that are said even on days when the Torah is not read. I mentioned the fact that Park Avenue Synagogue on Friday night services, uh, they do a special part of the service praying for healing. So that has become a more significant place within our services. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in detail when we take a look at an actual teshuva, a rabbinic discussion of this. But I wanted to start by asking the question, we're going to go back coincidentally to a teshuvah that was in Rabbi Barmash's book. You remember we had looked at this book at a lot of different teshuvot, and one of the ones she asked. Now this is unusual. The teshuvah is, what are the chances that our prayers are answered by God? Okay, that's an important question. And notice before we can get this teshuvah, she says, this is Rabbi Halevi. We'll see he's a very prominent Israeli rabbi. That's a theological question. A classic rabbinic teshuvah is not only is this chicken kosher, that's classic, but we've seen, what do we do about triage? What are we supposed to do to help the poor? What sort of ways in which talk about healing? What do we do at end of life? Do we have to take every measure? What is the law? What is the law? What is the ruling? Is it a yes or is it a no? And teshuvot, rabbinic responsa, are typically going to say, okay, that's a good question. These are the sources, and we're going to weigh the sources. And at the end of the teshuvah, you're going to get a yes or a no. Or sometimes, we see teshuvot from the rabbinical assembly where you get a split decision. Some say yes, some say no, or sometimes it's a little more complicated. But generally, teshuvot are practical matters of halacha. What is the ruling? And we've, over the course of our years here, we've seen a lot. But what about this question? How would a rabbi answer the question, what are the chances that our prayers are answered by God? Why would a rabbi write a teshuvah about that? Any suggestions? No. Well, let's take, I think what is fairly clear. Gee, I really like to know, I would really like to know what are the chances of my prayers being answered by God. I mean, I pray a lot, and as many of you do. So what am I doing? Am I expecting God to say yes, no, or maybe? I mean, what's going on? So it's an interesting question, and that it is, as Rabbi Barmash points out, this is not a typical teshuvah. Why would we even expect it? So you're going to notice that Rabbi Barmash asks certain questions about his arguments and theology, theological quandaries. We'll come back to these questions, but now we're going to take a look at the actual teshuvah itself in a second. I'll pull it up. Okay, does everybody see that? Is it large enough? Okay, I just need to adjust my screen a little bit here so that I can see it clearly. Yeah, I can do something here. Okay. So here they are. This is a Rabbi Chaim David Halevi. Note, he is a modern Israeli, 1924, 1998. Okay, so we're not talking, the medieval period or ancient times where you might say was the how sophisticated. Yeah, by the way, the sophistication of the theology of the rabbis of ancient times was quite on a high level, but you might say, oh, this is a question that, was fairly simple. But he was a major voice in halachic discourse. In other words, he was a major voice in questions that were, yes, no, maybe, very practical matters of Jewish law. Actually, we recently had the, can I buy the peppercorns if the merchant is dishonest, right? We looked at that, how far up the supply chain we have to do about honesty. Now he was, he's Sephardic, okay? He was the Sephardic chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. So that tells you that this man was very well known and very well thought of, wrote books, hosted a radio show. So in other words, he was not holed up the whole time of his life in a yeshiva and was not interacting with the modern world. He innovative in how he composed his books. Rather than presenting detailed analysis, he wrote in a lively, vivid manner, citing sources as needed, and so on. Okay, so here we have his teshuva. Whoops, I mean I gotta oh, do something. I have to. There it is. Okay, fine. The following response is unusual because it discusses theological matters. Where response generally just matters of practical law. Yes, no, maybe. Rabbi Halevi is one of the first rabbinic decisors to innovate writing responsa on theological questions. Okay, so here we have the question. Rabbi Halevi grapples with the theological dilemma of whether requests made during prayer will be answered positively by God. If the answer is yes, it appears that a person has caused God to change. But how can an omniscient, omnipotent, and perfect God possibly be induced by a mortal to fulfill that mortal's will? You mean I can change God's mind and God is perfect? Wait a second. There's a contradiction here. And here's the actual question. What are our chances of expecting that our requests and supplications will be fulfilled if ab initio the will of God differs? By definition, the will of God may differ. How does it? By the way, and notice he's talking about only certain types of prayer. Types of prayer, he's talking about supplications. There are many different types of prayers. This particular type is very common, and certainly in our liturgy and in many liturgies. So how can it be possible? There's the contradiction. By the way, quick question. What do you think? Does God answer our prayers? This is how do you deal with this? What is a seeming contradiction? Yeah, Rona? You're muted. We can't hear you.
How do we know what God's original plans are, right? Maybe that was his plan all along to have a certain outcome that you didn't expect. You prayed for it, but maybe that was what he was thinking all along.
But okay, maybe so you're saying maybe God's plan was to say no.
No, no, like let's say if you're praying for health from a certain health outcome, right? And
Mhm.
you think that your odds are poor, but then you pray and then God changed his mind. How do you know that that wasn't his plan all along to make you well from the very beginning? Maybe you didn't change it. That was the predestined idea.
Well, here's the question. Theologically, if God is of a nature of perfection, God doesn't change her mind, pardon the pronouns. God is perfect and never changes. Therefore, are we saying that you just were not aware what the end result was? What God had in mind was something you were not aware of? And are you saying that, oh, what I asked for was really what God intended? Or are you saying what I asked for was something that I was able to make God do something that God did not intend?
How could we possibly know that?
That's right.
Can't.
You can't.
Possible.
It's a very difficult one. Yes. Any other comments? What do you think? Any other comments before we look at what Rabbi Halevi talks about? No? Okay. Yeah. Rini?
Do we have any um, um, feelings about that God doesn't control every single thing? That, I mean, we believe in some free will and maybe just things happen because people who do pray for someone's healing, it doesn't always happen. That person dies. So
Mhm.
why, would God answer? Let's say, I prayed for my mother and she died, which she
Mhm.
did. But I was praying for a cousin and she has improved. So, ha- you know, is it just that I'm thinking of her and offering support and the doctors cured her? And my mother was ill before they had a certain cure that could have cured her. It's,
Or, yeah,
it's,
no, go
yeah.
ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say it's discouraging to pray if you think your prayers are not heard or answered, but I really can't imagine that um, that there's a spiritual being or whatever who's going around hearing billions of prayers and answering each one. It's like worse than email.
Not only that, some of them are praying for contradictory things.
Right. Right. So
Uh,
it's hard to reckon that whole thing.
yes, it is hard. It is definitely hard to reconcile. Classically, there are a couple of contradictory logical issues, right? If God
Hmm.
controls everything, then I can't change God's mind. Or maybe God doesn't control everything. Well, that creates a theological problem, uh, that God doesn't control everything. Or you could say God intends not to control that and everything, i.e., God created nature, and God lets nature take its course. If a certain disease is taking its course by natural means, God will not interfere. Okay, or you could say that God gave people free will. There are a number of ways of dealing with this, but this is really one of the classical issues of theology, and it's not an easy one. Sometimes people just say, you know what, I just don't know, and it's hard to make a perfectly coherent theology with all of that going on. But let's see how he answers this. Okay. So what was anyone going to comment? Anyone else? Let's see what Rabbi Halevi says. Okay. Section A, petitionary prayer is part of our tradition. Okay. Well aware that a significant part of prayer is devoted to requests for aid from God, right? I mean, the Shemona Esrei, right? One of the key prayers of Judaism is made up of petitions, right? He acknowledges, but not belabor, the criticism that such prayer may be seen as problematic. Rather, he presents well-known examples of biblical characters making specific requests for prayer and quotes from their general request asking that their prayers be answered. He affirms that petitioning God during prayer is acceptable, and clear evidence of biblical characters making requests in prayer is irrefutable. I.e., he's really pulling back. So let's start from a very simple. Let's question your premise. Be sure that your basic premise is correct. That it's okay to ask God for things in prayer. That petitionary prayer, right? It's only one type of prayer, and in Judaism, we know petitionary prayer does, in fact, play a major role in our liturgy, right? We have prayers that, we say the Shema, and we read biblical verses, and we read Psalms. So there are other parts of prayer that don't necessarily are prayers of thankfulness, prayers of wonder. There are also other types of prayers, but let's take a look at part of prayer. It is true that we cannot ignore that a considerable part of prayer is intended for entreaty, turning to God to fulfill our request and our material and spiritual needs. One may claim that this isn't pure worship of God and is not worship of God at all. That's a very strong statement. You mean all of those prayers I was asking for stuff? Is that's not prayer, huh? To this, we may say that this claim is an error. Okay. For the Torah itself tells of Abraham praying for healing of Avimelech. We just read that in the Torah recently. Eliezer praying by the well. That was last week. Gee, I hope I'm sent by Abraham, and he wants me to find a wife. I'm praying that the person that I'm going to this well, and if there's going to be a woman at this well who's going to be the right wife for my master's son. He very clearly prays for that, right? Moses praying. Let's do the next page here. For Pharaoh. Okay, in other words, each time one of the one of the plagues comes about, Moses says, okay, I'll pray to God to stop the plague. And the plague stops pretty much. Israelites praying for themselves at the time of peril near the Sea of Reeds. Moses praying for the Israels a number of times in the wilderness and for Aaron, and many of the prophets of Israel praying for God in times of peril. All of this explicit in the Torah. Solomon included this request of God during the dedication of the temple in Jerusalem. May you hear in your heavenly abode any prayer or supplication offered by any person among all your people Israel, each of whom knows his own affliction when he spreads his palms towards this house. So in other words, he's asking for God to hear the prayer. Now, does that mean hear the prayer mean answer it positively? But certainly there is a sense here that yes, petitionary prayer is okay. Nehemiah said, "Oh God, grant awesome God, a God of heaven, great and awesome God who stays faithful to his covenant and those who love him and keep his commandments. May your ear be attentive and your eyes open to receive the prayer of your servant." Okay, again, he's starting from a very basic ground. Okay, petitionary prayer. Supplication and prayer is one of its foundations and is therefore an important basic element in the worship of God, whether the request comes naturally in response to divine judgments, as is written in the Babylonian Talmud. Crying out to God is favorable for a person both before divine judgment that has been decreed for that person and after the judgment has been decreed. In other words, any time when there's something good that happens to you or not, prayer is fine. Okay, so that he's saying he's starting there. Rabbi Halevi confronts two questions. How is it possible to change God's will by making a request of prayer? Okay, God is perfect. God never changes. That's some very basic theology. And if we are judged according to our deeds and then rewarded or punished according to our good or bad deeds, how can we request a change in our situation through prayer? Oh, there's a whole theological stance within the Bible that God rewards or punishes us based not upon what we say to God or pray to God, but how we act, right? So if that's the basic assumption of the Bible, then why would prayer make any difference? Rabbi Halevi argues that these questions are mistaken. What is positive in our lives is the result not of our good deeds, but of God's kindness towards human being. God's grace, right? It's a theological stance that God is good for us because God is good and God wants good for humanity. So if you do good things, don't assume that those things are necessarily the reward of your actions or your prayers. They're just part of God's goodness. Rabbi Halevi attests that the true purpose of prayer is not to change God, but to, whoops, let me get that down. Okay, 1 second. I'm going to have to move something on my screen, which is not moving. There it is. The true purpose of prayer is not to change God, right? But to change us, to inspire us to seek God and follow God's will rather than our material wants. Again, the question must be asked. Changing God's will is not possible. Now he's making that assumption, which is again consistent with theology about God's greatness, and therefore, what is the purpose of entreaty? Moreover, are not the conditions of our life, for good or for bad, derived in accordance with our deeds, good or bad? If so, what is the power of prayer? But this is not the truth. Only infrequently can we extrapolate our good situation directly from our good deeds. Now, what is he doing here? He's pointing out there is an inherent contradiction in real life. What is the contradiction he's pointing out? The good aren't necessarily rewarded and the bad aren't necessarily punished. That's reality. That's life, right? Moreover, are not the conditions of our life, for good or for bad, derived in accordance? If so, what is the power of prayer? But this is not the truth. Only infrequently can we extrapolate our good situation directly from our good deeds. That's a very important theological statement. Right? Don't think that if you're good, good things will happen to you, and don't think that people are punished because automatically they did bad things. What's the strength of that theological statement? That's the way the world works, right? What's the weakness of that theological statement? I wish it was otherwise. But here he is pointing out that there is a reality in the world that may not be like what we like, and it does cause theological problems, but accept reality, right? Many of the good circumstances of our life flow from God's loving kindness. We always talk about undeserved evil, right? How many times, why do bad things happen to good people? We infrequently talk about undeserved good. Why do good things happen? Do I deserve all the good things that are in my life? Do I deserve all the bad things that are in my life? He is saying, you just can't figure this out. Many of the good circumstances of our life flow from God's loving kindness, not because of any merit of ours do we lay our supplication before you, but because of your abundant mercies, God's grace. That sometimes you think that's just a pure, you hear that in Christianity. Oh, that's what Christianity believes. No, this is a pure Jewish belief. God's will is always for the good. God values those who are in awe of him, just as the light of the sun shines upon all earthly objects and upon the entity most ready to receive the light, it illumines more. Thus is the will of God. The person whose deeds are worthy is the one who is ready to absorb the loving kindness of God and his mercy, which are the revelation of God's will. Therefore, the prayer that a person makes does not involve a change in God, may God be blessed, but rather a change in the human being who makes a shift in his spiritual preparation that causes him to let go of his will to return to God, who shines the light of God's superior will upon him. Therefore, the prayer that has a chance of being answered positively is that prayer that the worshiper thinks he is not worthy of receiving because his deeds prevent it. From the standpoint of your iniquities have been a source between you and God. But that prayer whose purpose is drawing closer to God and divine worship, prayer that is in the heart, and prayer seeking to justify and purify one's physical powers and transcend one's material limitations, the appropriate preparation to receiving the outpouring of God's will and let's go down to the next page, and his loving kindness. This idea is based upon the words of Rabbi Joseph Albo. Okay, so what is he saying here? What does he say? Anyone want to, what did he just say? Anyone? Rini, what did he just say?
I think he's saying we can't change God's will. We can change the way we approach God. We can change ourselves. We can't change God.
Right. We can change ourselves. We can make ourselves greater receptacles for God's will. And one of the great purposes of prayer is the prayer that the worshiper thinks he is not worthy of receiving because his deeds prevent it, but the prayer whose purpose is drawing closer to God and divine worship. Prayer is intended to purify the soul of the person who is praying rather than intended to change God's will. Now, what's the positive and negative of this? Why is that a good answer? Why is that a bad answer?
Well, it's a good answer if you think that it helps you accept whatever has happened. Let's say, because we're praying for a treaty to do something. And I know people who have prayed for someone's recovery and that person dies or something, and they turn away from God and their religion, and others who come closer. So I think, it's a way to help people cope if they choose that direction. So that's the positive side. I couldn't change it, but I'll try to be a better person. The negative side is losing your faith altogether.
Yeah. The positive, right. The positive side is that you can say, look, I asked specifically for this. That did not happen. But did my prayer make me more sensitive to God's will in the world in various ways? Okay. But the bad part is, hey, I really wanted this to happen. and this was very important to me. And couldn't have, couldn't God have made this happen? And he is saying, nope, you've got the wrong uh, expectation for your prayer. So, and any of these answers will, I think we can easily see there are certainly positives and negatives in how one looks at it. And now, okay, now he goes back. Returning to the question of whether requests made during prayer will be answered, Rabbi Halevi issues the caution bolstered by Talmudic sources that expecting answers is wrong-headed. While the traditional text of the Siddur integrates both hymns and requests to God, right? The whole preliminary, if you, those of us who come to the services right at the beginning know that the whole early part of the service is psalms and praise. While the traditional text of the Siddur integrates both hymns and requests to God, he omits the possibility of modifying its text. Transcending the overt meaning of liturgical request, he urges us towards modesty in prayer. We should use prayer as a means of drawing closer to God. That's the main point that he's making here. Prayer is a way of getting closer to God. Prayer is not a way of changing God's will. And this is what our rabbis taught. Anyone who prolongs his prayer and expect it to be answered will ultimately come to heartache. So, this is from the Talmudic period. This is, not a modern, this is not Harold Kushner. This is a Talmudic rabbi making that point. Rashi explains.
Rabbi,
Yes, Sima.
Rabbi, what does getting closer to God give you then?
A better spiritual life, a more fulfilled life, an ability to feel God's presence in this world. Is that enough? Is that what you're asking?
I do believe in organized religion, but I'm a big skeptic. I think as Jews, we are brought up to be skeptics. I mean, we question everything. It's curiosity and questioning things. So it's allowed in our religion versus other religions. It's not necessarily allowed. But I'm going to say something, and don't judge me, anybody. But I always laugh at the sports, the athletes, all these people in different professions that say, God, it was because of God that this happened, or I was able to win the Super Bowl, or I was able to, those are the things about, I know it's not Judaism, but it just really boggles my mind that God's in control of whether you win the Super Bowl or not. I don't know.
I agree with you totally. Because I would like God to let me know who is going to win the Super Bowl. That would be great.
We'd all be very wealthy.
Yeah, I could pray to God and my prayers will be heard. But you're absolutely correct. How many times do we hear they run before they say they're going to Disney World, they say, thank God for
what they were just they won or they were given or whatever. Yes.
As opposed to say, thank God that I was given the gifts that allow me to be an athlete. Boom. And that allowed me to compete. God gave me the gifts that allowed me to compete, and done. As opposed to God gave me God influenced the outcome of this athletic contest, right? No, I totally agree with you, Sima.
Right, which is different than Judaism, where we don't ask for things. As we're reading now, we're not supposed to be asking for anything, versus other religions feel that they do ask God for things.
Well, we do. No, we do ask God for a lot of things. Think about the Amida. We're asking for God for world peace. For a good job. Parnasah, right? They're right in there, right? They are there. We are asking God for things. So the question that Rabbi Halevi is trying to answer is that reality check. Reality check. That's not the word. Because the world doesn't necessarily work that way, does that mean that our prayers have no purpose? Right? And so you are left in yes, there are theological conundrums in any of these, quote, answers, right? Mm-hmm. And the way that Rabbi Halevi is saying it is that don't expect that you can change God's will, but do expect that there is a way of being in the world and of understanding God's presence in the world that prayer can give you a greater ability to be, right? I mean, that's what he's saying, right? If a
I think
person
it just
thinks,
helps you cope with life and get through life. That's why I do believe in organized religion, and
uh-huh,
there is something to spirituality, but I think it's something that you create. It's kind of like meditation or anything else to just to get your mind out of and off of other things to try to just be in a different way in your own mind.
okay, well,
So
here Rabbi Levi might say, well, yes, we want you to be in a different way, but it's not just in your own mind. It's because you're aligning yourself with something that is greater than yourself, which is a different way of looking at it, right? Is it one way is saying, oh, I'm just aligning the molecules in my head, as opposed to the molecules in my head are aligning with something grander that is giving me a greater sense of place and purpose in the universe, right? A little difference there. Okay. Rini.
Maybe when we're asking for things, like good health, and especially at the new moon, a Rosh Chodesh, we ask for all these. Everything should go well. Maybe it's not specifically, asking for wealth, but the the spirit and ability to go after what we want. It's not saying God throw down, money on my head, but it's maybe asking for the ability to work, the ability to be healthy, to take care of ourselves in order
Well,
to be
yeah,
healthy and to
yeah,
put it back on us, but asking for the strength and the wisdom to do that.
yeah. That certainly that would be in line with Rabbi Halevi is saying. Give there are spiritual gifts which can help me attain some of the things that I'm praying for. So I would like to see a greater realization of those gifts in my life.
it's kind of like, teach, don't give the person the fish, teach a man to fish, and he can then, it is the same concept. It's kind of giving us a way to cope with things and look away at, like Rini's saying, at how to accomplish things on our own and not just sit back and expect someone just to drop it in your lap kind of thing.
Well, when you ask for it, you're not going to have it dropped in your lap, right?
All
Yeah,
right. All right.
yeah, no. All right, so let's say, okay, thus if a person prays is not answered, okay, okay. If this is again from Rashi, if a person thinks that his prayer request must be fulfilled because he is praying, his request will never be granted. Therefore, if a person prays and is not answered, he should pray again, as it says in the Babylonian Talmud. A person who prayed and saw that he was not answered should pray again, as it says, "Hope in the Lord, strengthen yourself, let your heart take courage, and hope in the Lord." That's from a psalm, the ending of a psalm that actually we say during the month of Elul. The month preceding, stop saying the month preceding the high holidays. Kavel Adonai chazak ve'emes libecha ve'kavel Adonai. For most of the time, a person does not achieve the ultimate goal of prayer, which is drawing close to Creator the first time. Therefore, he must pray again, and that is to say, he must continue preparing himself spiritually for his Creator, and in the end, he shall be answered. He shall be answered not because what he prayed for happened, but he shall be answered because he is preparing himself spiritually to receive and accept the ultimate that is God. Okay, that's his answer. So do you like what do you think? Let's go back to we'll go back to Rabbi Barmash, and she has those uh questions. Yeah. What does Rabbi Halevi argue is the true goal of prayer? Uh, do you agree with his Do you agree with his conclusion? Anyone? Okay, Rini.
Well, I think it's much better than, praying and expecting the outcome you're praying for. I think it's better to think of prayer as a way of just being closer to God. If you feel that there is a God, which a lot of people can't grab that concept, or just being closer to some spirit in the world, but I think he's right to say the onus is on the person to make a change.
Charlie, can you mute?
Yeah, he just did. I think the onus, what he's saying is the onus is on the person to make themselves better so they can receive whatever spirituality is in the world. And I think that's why I personally love to go to synagogue, because I'm experiencing a certain spirituality with other people who feel as I do, and that permeates it permeates my life and helps me to be a better person. And I think that's what he's saying. It helps you to be a better person. Even if you're asking God for things, you can't expect God to, you know, manage your life.
Okay, very
Things
good. Thank you.
happen.
Very,
And
very lovely. Thank you for that. Anyone else? What do you think of Rabbi Halevi's conclusion? Helpful? Do you agree, disagree? Is it helpful? Is it harmful? Anyone? No? Rona, I see you took
Like
off
what Rini
your,
said. Rini, I
yeah,
agree with you. It's great how you put it together, and that's how I see it too.
okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Fran, I see you talking. Are you talking to us? Are you trying to talk to us? But you're muted. No? Okay, anyone else? Okay, so this is one way of looking about praying for healing, in that we're not necessarily, it won't necessarily, I've also heard someone say, um, the prayers for healing are, you wouldn't want a God who says yes to every prayer, because some of them are contradictory. So you can't expect a God to agree to everything. So that you may say that my prayers to petition are not answered. Well, that's the way it is. Otherwise, God couldn't possibly be able to fulfill everyone's request. But let's take a look at another question. Okay, Rona, you had your hand up again?
I was going to say that when things do go the way you hope, it gives you a great appreciation of the presence of God, and
Mhm.
thankful for that, plus everything that's positive.
Okay. So I want to take a look at one or two other texts about healing. Probably won't have enough time to finish this one, but this is this deals more closely with the actual nature of how we pray for healing, and then we'll take a look at another couple of other examples. This is written by Rabbi Eli Kanfor, who is the president and CEO of Hadar Institute. Some of you may or may not be familiar with Hadar Institute. It's a Jewish educational, spiritual synagogue kind of place that has services, has classes, very successful, started in Manhattan, uh, and has really been a model of, I would say, non-Orthodox, serious spiritual engagement with Judaism. Um, and the Institute has done done very well. Um, and so he's asking that question. Let's focus about the way we pray for healing. Praying for the sick is the core of Jewish worship. One of the earliest examples is Moses' prayer for Miriam. So let's take a look at exactly how we pray for healing. One of the most intense and shortest prayers in of the Torah. What is the form and style of Moses' prayer? Teach us about how to pray for healing. In other words, We go into a synagogue, and we expect, okay, now it's the Misha Barak time, and I'm going to say the Misha Barak, we'll sing David Friedman, and you'll say the name, and that's how we pray for healing. Well, there might be different ways. Where does it all come from? So he's going to go back and say, let's take a look at one of the earliest very clear prayers we have for healing in the Torah, and see what we can learn about that and how that influences our way of praying for healing. Okay. First, he sets out the situation. What happens? Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses for marrying a Cushite woman. Okay. What exactly was wrong with marrying a Cushite woman, we don't know, but they don't like the fact that he married a Cushite woman. Let's just say that. They claim also they are on a par with Moses in their connection with God. Doesn't God also speak to us? Yeah, Moses, why are you setting yourself up? But God rejects their criticism, chastises Moses and Aaron, explaining that the quality of Moses' prophecy is more intense and intimate than theirs. God gets angry, departs from their presence. Miriam finds herself afflicted with tzara'at, with a skin disease. There are a lot of questions we can ask about this. Well, hey, how come Aaron didn't get sick? How come only Miriam? All right. Why tzara'at? Why this mysterious skin disease in the Bible? And then the rabbis go on and on. But then Aaron begs Moses to forgive their sin. Without hesitation, Moses responds to their request. He offers, here is the first, really, one of the first, not the first, one of the first clear prayers for healing we have in the Bible. Vayitzak Moshe el Adonai lemor el na rafa na la. Okay. Moses, I like the way he this is, you don't usually find this translation in our translations. Moses screamed to God. Usually he said, God entreats God. He screamed, Vayitzak, cried out. Yeah, he cried out to God. El na rafa na la. God, please heal her now. What might we learn about prayers for healing based upon this short prayer that we just heard from Moses? Are there any general lessons? Look at this prayer. What can you say about this prayer? What are the elements of this prayer? Short. Excellent. Thank you. It's very short. It is 5 words. Good. What else? Anything else about it?
He also is asking for this to happen quickly.
Yes.
Not sometime in the future,
right.
But now.
Heal her now. I don't have a lot of words. Applying to you for God right now, right? And of course, the other one thing is he doesn't use her name. Miriam Bat. We that's a little unusual because we always pray for healing with somebody's Hebrew name, and we also usually add the mother's name, right? He just says Miriam. He doesn't even say Miriam. He just says her. Okay. So Rabbi Comfort tries to understand it. It's brief and its form. Rabbi Eliezer taught that no one has a prayer shorter than Moses. Very few people complain about synagogue services that they're too short. I can't recall ever hearing that one in my career in the rabbinate. The prayers are too long. It has the halls of an urgent, spontaneous prayer. Talk to God as El, short, quick, right? 5 words center around Rafa. Notice the word Rafa is the center, the 3rd word of the 5. And it's an oral chiastic structure. Chiastic means that the last word and the first word, the second word and the 4th word refer to each other. That's chiastic structure. It's very common in biblical poetry. It's actually one of the classic marks of biblical poetry, right? The A terms are inversions of the sounds El and La, right? Think about El and La. Na and Na, that's the same sound. And they highlight the central word, which is Rapha, right? Okay. God listens to Moses' prayer and heals Miriam. following a time outside of the camp. Okay. One striking feature is its lack of intimacy or specificity. God, please heal my sister from this skin disease that you gave to her. Not only does Moses use God's most generic name, El, but he doesn't mention Miriam. Rav Chisda derives from this example a general rule. One does not need to mention their name. Now, wait a second. That's not what we do nowadays. After all, Moses didn't mention Miriam, and she was healed. Are we doing it wrong? From this ruling, one might imagine that when praying for the sick, we do not need to mention the name. However, later on, this is interesting, only later on, 14th century, 15th century, they limit this ruling. It only applies when the sick person is right before us when we pray on their behalf. So when you're praying for someone who's right in front of you, please heal her. But when you're in the synagogue, however, the Maharil says, if the sick person is not present, you must state their name. Okay, that's what we do. The comment of the Maharil seems to be a key basis for our modern practice, to mention the names. A midrash tells a different reading Miriam's name into Moses' prayer. The midrash adds little stories or it adds to what we read in the biblical text. And so the midrash, in that moment, Moses drew a small circle and stood within it and prayed for mercy on her, saying, I will not move from here until you heal Miriam, my sister. That's a longer prayer, and it uses her name. While the proof text for the story does not include Miriam's name, the midrash can't bear to leave it out. It has to say Miriam. Moses' urgency is expressed in this ultimatum to God, I am not leaving the circle until you act. Moses' love of his sister is expressed by his mentioning of her name. The importance of praying for healing of a particular loved one, not simply a general praying for healing, becomes a central feature of the Amidah. The Talmud discusses that one is meant to add personal prayers to the standard words of the Amidah. The consensus is that one is meant to ask for all personal needs in the 16th blessing, a general prayer about God hearing our voice. Shema Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu Chutz Rachem Aleinu. It's the 16th blessing. However, a tradition in the name of Rav indicates that special prayers for the sick are meant to be added to the blessing about healing. Rabbi Chia Bar Ashi said, Rav said, even though they said a person asks about their personal needs during who hears prayer, blessing number 16, Shema Kolenu Chutz Rachem, if they have a sick person in their house, they should say it in the blessing of the sick people. Have any of you noticed that in our Siddur, when it comes to that blessing, it says it has a special paragraph where you can add the name of somebody? I don't know if you've noticed that. That's the weekday Amida. I should have prepared that for you here. Let me. I'm going to take out a Siddur, which I apologize for not doing this before the class, but let me just find one of the places where that exists. Here we go. No, not there. Sorry. All right. My mistake. I will find this. Okay, here it is. Here's a Fulamida. And this Fulamida, we have a blessing. Okay. This is the blessing. It says, Rafa'enu Adonai v'nei Rafei, Hoshienu v'nei Rashea. Heal us when we be healed. On behalf of one who is ill, there's a special edition. Here also no fanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'he'avatenu v'imotenu shetishlach refuah l'shlema min hashamayim refuah t'nefesh refuah t'aguf la. For you should heal, and then there's a blank space. Many people, and certainly have said to me, Rabbi, please pray for our refuah shlema for a particular individual, and I'll add them to the refuah shlema list. But I always will say, not always, but I usually will say to the person, well, your prayers too count. If you have someone who is sick, you too should be praying for healing for that person. And of course, many people don't necessarily say the daily Amida, but anytime you do say the daily Amida, right here in our Siddur is that space, okay? The worshiper can pray for the healing and blessing 8. It is if the general blessing, hearing prayer is not enough. They need to be prayed for in a specific blessing, the blessing about healing. Now there's a lovely little statement here, which he talks about. In my own prayer life, praying for the sick in this moment of the Amida is a powerful one. It is my opportunity to focus on prayers, asking God to heal specific people and to mention them by name in the middle of the Amida. I find that if my concentration drifts during the Amida, let's face it, it's sometimes hard to be perfectly concentrating during the whole time. This moment returns me back to the prayer as I focus on the people I am praying for. This moment in the Amida allows me to express my love and concern for the people I am thinking about. By the way, notice what he's saying. This moment allows me to express my love and concern for the people. He's not saying this moment causes the people to be healed, right? He's not saying that God is going to hear my prayer. What for him, what does the prayer do? It has an effect on him, right? I am thinking about renewing my focus on the prayer I am saying. So therefore, here when we talked about Rabbi Halevi talking about praying for the sick, about what effect it has on us, here's one of the effects it has on this rabbi, is that when he says their name in the Amida, again, expresses my concern and love. Okay. The power and urgency of praying for the sick is perhaps seen in Shabbat prayers. On Shabbat, one is not meant to pray for one's needs, right? There's a statement that you should not pray for individual needs on Shabbat. That's why why is the Amida so much shorter on Shabbat than it is on weekend? Because we take out the middle requests and needs. However, an old debate already indicated the exception to the rule when it comes to praying for the sick, that you don't pray for individual needs. However, when it comes to sick, Beit Shammai says one does not pray for the sick on Shabbat, but Beit Hillel permits it. There's a classic, oh, Beit Hillel is so much nicer, right? The Mishabera, it draws an ancient language from the Talmud, which advises that when visiting the sick on Shabbat, one should recite. Well, it's true that Shabbat is not a time for crying out. Our instinct to cry out cannot fully be suppressed. I want to try to finish this in the next minute or two. In the same Talmudic section, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi teach that even on Shabbat, one can pray specifically, may the omnipotent, omnipresent may have mercy upon you. Okay, so let's just do the conclusion. Moshe models the aspect of urgency, fuses the prayers of healing when he cries out. The critical importance of praying for the sick by name overrides the normal rules of liturgy. We specifically add a prayer in the middle of the weekday Amida, praying for healing, and we even pray for healing on Shabbat. May God answer these prayers for healing just as God answered Moses' prayers for Miriam. Okay, so here he gives both the origins, and we see a debate among the early rabbis, but the praying for healing was so important that they overrode the rules of not praying for individual needs on Shabbat. Okay, comments or questions before we conclude? No? Okay, well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Everyone have a good day for the rest of the day, and we'll continue and look at some other issues on praying for healing in our next class next week.
Thank
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you all for coming.
Bye.
Here, Rabbi.
Bye now.